Bienvenue à tous. Welcome. I am so happy to be here at Hackfest, and thank you everybody for coming today to hear my talk. So first of all, salut. Mm. Mm. We know it's going to be a good talk now. Okay, so I love Halloween, and I've made my slides a little festive for you again this year. Hope you enjoy. All right, I'm Cheryl Biswas. I'm from Toronto. Sorry. And I work with a major financial institution. Sorry. I'm also happy to say I'm the founding member of the Diana Initiative, and we do great work to promote diversity and inclusion and encourage women to come and join us in this amazing space so that we can continue to grow and learn from each other. I also am a member of C3X, where we do cyber simulations for college students. This was our third year, and it was absolutely awesome. On Twitter, you can follow me as Encrypted, and let's begin. Finally, the obligatory disclaimer: the views expressed here are mine alone, and not of any employer. So I wanted to do this talk because I think we need to take a bigger picture view of threats and risks to our enterprise environments based on what's coming inside of them. Our current security frameworks, our existing regulations are not aligned to what's actually there. My hope today is that I can better explain to you what IoT in enterprise is through definitions, some examples, how the threats work and attacks, and then give you some takeaways that you can bring back in action in your own environment and hopefully better secure your existing frameworks and policies. Okay, so welcome to EOT, which is essentially IoT in your enterprise. Everybody knows what IoT is, right? Anybody? It is the Internet of Things. There's lots of other acronyms for it, but we'll stick with that one. So essentially, it's what happens when we bring all of those things that connect, but just into our organizational networks. I want you to think about that for a second, because we've so totally got a handle on IoT, right? No, not a chance. And that is why I'm here, because I think there's a lot we need to talk about. So according to Gartner, all of those things that connect are supposed to double by 2020 from 2018. We're replacing older stuff, of course, with newer stuff. We're going to have something like 5.8 billion endpoints to secure. That's great news. Wow, the job security in this place. What's projected to really boom, however, is building and automation, automotive, no surprise there, and connected lighting. Yes, because that really is a thing. Now, there's a lot of talk about the benefits of being able to do this and what it brings to business and business's bottom line. So we're looking at things like, of course, improving efficiency, right? And being able to combine innovation with collaboration. Not arguing, these are all good things. These are things we definitely want. But as the saying goes, with great reward will come great risk. And you need to be careful what you wish for. Kind of like the sorcerer's apprentice. So when it comes to EOT, we don't exactly understand what it is we're doing. We're bringing all of that IoT into our enterprises, onto our networks, without actually having a real plan or security in place. The biggest industries at risk to this because of their growth projections are manufacturing, transportation, and utilities. There's a whole lot that can go wrong there. And here's another big number I'm going to throw out at you. Over 90% of the data in the world, and we know what we're dealing with now in terms of data. Shall I say the word? Desjardins? No, sorry. Over 90% of that data has been created in just the past 2 years. Who would like to take a gander, take a wild guess in bytes per day of how much data we generate? Throw out the biggest number you can think of. Come on. Ooh, that's a lot. Is that bigger than 2.5 quintillion bytes? Because I didn't even know quintillion was a number until I did this research. Yeah, and we just keep making more of it. If I had candy, I would give it to you. But I almost took somebody's eye up the last time I threw candy at the audience, and so not anymore. Sorry. Okay, so let's talk about this. When IoT becomes enterprise technology, well, that surface increases. And by surface, I mean our attack surface. And when the attack surface increases, well, we're talking about liability. That's a dollars and cents amount right there. That's a bottom line for anybody who's in industry that they should be paying attention to. Some of that is engaged in terms of operational technology, but all of it is tied to achieving the goals and outcomes of the business. So in manufacturing, we're looking at things like automation, sensors, scanners, robots on the floor. In healthcare, well, it's crucial in healthcare because it helps in terms of cutting costs and also in terms of improving the patient's experience. But it also helps us do really important work like servicing people who are far away from available medical facilities. So we're looking at telemedicine. We're also looking at the devices that literally keep us alive, whether it's pumps, pacemakers, MRI machines, been in that, done that, patient monitors. This really matters. And I don't know about you, but I have been to some excellent talks about the risk factors associated with the growing number of connected medical devices. The risks, the dangers are just continuing to grow. And it's really important for us to be able to share that and sound the alarm on it and get involved in helping to secure this better. You may not be aware of this, but the fact is there are up to 15 connected devices per hospital bed. Then, of course, there's what's going on inside of our businesses. So corporations use smart TVs. They also use digital conferencing. And then we have got our connected printers and scanners and the joys of those. Retail. Retail uses it everywhere that it can. It's not just the scanners, it's not just the payment machines, it's beacons to try to get you to buy more products. And it's smart shelves that keep them alerted to the fact that we've run out of towels in aisle 3. And it's also for being able to track theft and to do loss prevention. Transportation and logistics is a huge user. We've got warehouses where we have to maintain industry as well as, in some cases, temperature control and safety. We've also got it on those big trucking rigs because if they're transporting valuable perishables, you have to maintain the temperature and the coolant. Otherwise, something's going to arrive and somebody's going to get food poisoning or it's going to spoil. It's also used to track things like where they are on their route, possibly to reroute them, to check their fuel consumption. There are now wearables for people so that employees can communicate back and forth with each other. And then, of course, in our buildings, we've got security, webcams, locks, lighting, and of course, HVAC. That's a lot of vulnerability just waiting to happen. Oh, and yeah, our mini bars, those also are connected. So here is your first and possibly your most biggest takeaway today. Our procurement is not in line with our securement of things. And if the greatest projected source for endpoint electronics next year is going to be connected cars and network printing, all I can say is we are so hacked. So let's talk about what it is we think we know when it comes to defining IoT. Has anybody seen this picture before? Everybody touches a different part of the elephant. They don't know what it actually is because they're blindfolded and they come up with a different explanation of what it is, what they think it is. I think that's really us around IoT. And we have to understand IoT if we're going to talk about it in the enterprise realm. Surprise, this is not IoT. Now, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. This looks like there's 1,000 words, and I'm sorry for the resolution, but this is the complexity of what it takes to connect essentially basic things into our networks. We've got a raft of protocols, billions of sensors out there. We have to factor in APIs, all kinds of different manufacturers, their specialized firmware. It's far more complex than I believe we realize. So, yes, simply put, IoT devices are non-internet things that now have been enabled to connect. I'm going to say this over again because I don't think we really appreciate how important this simple statement is, and that is at the heart of the matter. Then we allow them to communicate with each other and with other devices. IoT comes in different flavors because there's, of course, the industrial Internet of Things, there's healthcare Internet of Things, and there's, of course, what we call the enterprise of things. It's technology that communicates either machine to machine or mobile to mobile. But regardless of what flavor it is, what we are doing is extending that connectivity to ordinary objects, physical devices. And again, we got to remember, these were things that were not intentionally designed to connect. And we're giving them the ability to communicate online to all of those other devices. So what I see here is that we are expanding beyond our defined security parameters. We're bringing in something that we haven't really defined. And we're adding that digital intelligence to enable communications. But then we're taking us, the humans, out of the equation. And in that sense, we're handing over control to the machines. I'm just going to leave that with you. Let's talk about unmanaged endpoints. These are devices that do not have security in them, or at least security to the extent that we can go in and configure it properly. Plug and play is a good example. It's what it is. Convenience, my friends, has become the root of all evil. And many IoT devices are just that, unmanaged endpoints. They can communicate with a whole bunch of other devices. They've got the ability to not just process, but also to transmit information. They have an operating system on them. It's basic, but it's an operating system. However, try as we might, curse as much as we do, we cannot configure or manage the security on them using what we conventionally use. And they won't let us configure them to be better. We are stuck with what we get. So how bad could that be? Let's think of refrigeration on those transport trucks. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy seafood and shrimp. Well, if the temperature starts to fail, the temperature controls, and it starts to heat up and the sensors don't alert, that truck arrives at the destination with a ton of spoiled seafood. Well, that's lost revenue. What if we talk about a greater loss? Let's talk about the HVAC systems where we work, where we live, where we come to play, in your hotels. And what if we had an outbreak of an airborne contagion? A recent example is Legionnaire's disease. Has everybody heard of Legionnaire's disease? Yeah, it's serious and it can be fatal. And that is not the only kind of an airborne outbreak we could be facing through monitored HVAC systems. Think in terms of quality control, which we rely on for things that we use, for food that we eat. So what would happen if somebody got in and just, messed around with those settings? Would we know? How would we know? How could we tell? Are we able to monitor that? Are we monitoring that? You can call me paranoid. We've seen what happens when ransomware takes down hospitals, and it's an ongoing situation. So we rely on these devices, these sensors, these monitors, to be reliable and to notify us. We trust them. What is our rule in the security community around trust? Anybody? Throw it out for me. Zero trust. Yeah. So let's talk about hyperconnectivity. It's that consumer-driven need to take everything and plug it in. And that, of course, has made its way right into enterprise environments. We face a rush to market. So there's no real security happening in software-defined life cycles. We're facing supply chain risks and the possibility or the liability. So devices get shipped that can't be updated, or like we said, that have only a limited capacity to be updated. And that risk, it gets pushed down along the supply chain until whoever buys it owns it. And essentially it rests with the hapless consumer. According to a Ponemon survey that was done around March of 2017, most organizations were not inventorying IoT devices because they did not have centralized control over the IoT devices and the associated applications that were coming into their workplaces. Well, I don't think we've gotten any better. And I would say, hello, shadow IT. So how are you inventorying your networks for IoT devices? Are you able to monitor what's coming in and getting put on your networks? Would you see it? Would you recognize it for what it is? We call this BYO IoT. I'm just going to say this because it only takes one. Just one. So yeah, let's consider it an open invitation to shadow IoT through an increasing, unmonitored, unsanctioned BYOD. And everybody wants to bring their stuff in. And not everybody's going to tell anybody that they should tell, that they brought it, that they connected it. I think the saying is, it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. This seems to be an unwritten policy. So as IoT continues to move further and deeper into enterprise environments, driven, of course, by that consumer demand, we have got a real growing problem in terms of shadow IoT in our enterprises. We've got new challenges and risks that our current policies and regulations around compliance don't address. So I'd love to see a show of hands, and I'll just ask informally, does your current security policy manage the IoT of your third parties? Is this something that has even come up? Yeah. So in an article from 2018 in CSO, 97% of risk professionals said that a data breach or a cyber attack on their network that was caused by unsecure IoT devices would be, quote, catastrophic for their organization. That's a lot of people saying the same thing, and catastrophic is a very powerful word. If we look at this, I'd like to do the analogy in terms of a medical environment. So you have a lot of devices connected that could be at risk, highly at risk. However, those IT teams in hospitals, but these could be IT teams anywhere, don't have the visibility to be able to see what or how many of these types of IoT devices are actually connected to the network. Without that critical insight, they don't have an understanding of the threats, the possible attacks, and the risks that they're facing. So how do we get there? We need to be looking at what's on the network. We need end-to-end visibility, but we also have to be able to detect these for the objects that they are. These devices are getting attacked for their data, but the problem with this is once the attacker is in your network, they can do a lot more harm than just taking the data. So here are some takeaways from this section. We have an understanding of what makes IoT different when it's inside of your network. We're looking at an increasing risk of shadow IoT in enterprise environments. And we need to go hunting for it because it's not going to stand up and say, hello, I'm IoT. And then we need to work together to make IoT a shared responsibility within our groups. It can't just fall on one group. We know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So I heard a talk given by Christine Gladsbury. She's the head of product security operations at BlackBerry. And she talked about how the Internet of Things has exponentially grown within the consumer space, but also moved into enterprise environments. And enterprises are excited to use these new endpoints. They want to use them for their business value and the projected opportunities. They want to create organizational efficiencies. This is good business talk. These are good words to bring back when you're talking to the C-suite. And so you're using that combination of sensor data and algorithms so that you can streamline business processes, right? Dollar value there. Increased productivity, dollar value there. Develop leading edge products because we're so competitive, and yes, dollar value there. However, great reward equals great risk as we venture further into these unknown tech territories. And face it, we really do not have a handle on the risks and threats associated with IoT, as much as some people, some groups would like to think that they do. It's still an unknown. Hell, we're finding things that 20 years ago were not even considered a threat, were not even known to be a threat. What's the potential that we're sowing with this? So, what is it that we're not considering? And what are we not thinking of in terms of risk and attack and possibility? A lot of these devices have the ability to listen to us, to take away snippets and other important things from our casual conversations. Also, we don't really have a handle yet on cloud. Don't shoot me. We don't. But that happens to be the home of IoT. So we face serious capability gaps and issues when we're trying to integrate IoT into our existing networks. Part of the problem is we're not able, or we're not taking a holistic or a big picture view. We focus on just one part of it. And think back to the elephant. We only see the part that we're focusing on. Or think back to that $7,000 pen, I think it was, that NASA developed for the astronauts to take up into space that a bunch of different people in silos worked on. It leaves out the organizational capabilities and the change management functions that are essential when you are rolling out large-scale initiatives. Yes. So even with all that we know and understand about the inherent security risks of IoT, yes, the Internet of Shit, as we like to call it aptly, and with increased targeted ransomware attacks going through 2019, it's at least 118% over last year. Attacks on industry and municipalities and hospitals and schools. There are no real regulations or enforcements to ensure security here. Okay, now we know what it is and why we should care. Let's talk a little bit about how it actually works. I'm no expert, so I'm going to just stick to the basics here to help put everybody on the same platform. I'll ask first, is anybody here actively working on IoT or IoT security? Nice to meet you. And if you need to correct me on anything, I will appreciate it. Okay. So I'm going to present this in 3 basic layers. The first layer is physical. So these are sensors, actuators, smart devices, the things. So IoT things interface and they communicate to the cloud, and they use a gateway to do this. They communicate typically through wired or through localized radio frequency, RF networks. Now, some of these things come internet ready right out of the box for a plug and play experience. But there's a lot of older and legacy items out there that need a little help to connect. So they'll use things like analog or serial connections, and then they get connected by microcontrollers. You may know what some of these things are. There are systems on modules or SOMs. There's single board computers called, or SBCs, Arduinos, Raspberry Pis. Love Raspberry Pis. Then there are the IoT gateways. So these are your middlemen. They have an important role to play because they work as both the messenger and the translator for the things and the cloud. There's software programs that run within the field to help this happen. They're in close proximity to the physical devices. And what they'll do is they will normalize, connect, and then transfer the data between the physical devices layer and the cloud. They don't have just that limited capability. Many of these devices now are able to support additional computing and peripheral functions, and those will include telemetry, support for multiple protocol translations. This is important because there's a lot of different languages being spoken in that space. Artificial intelligence, you're dealing with reams and reams of raw data, so you need things like pre-processing and filtering so you can weed out what's just never going to be used. We're talking billions and billions and billions of bytes coming through. There's provisioning, device management. The good news is there's also security being put in at this layer and monitoring, and we want to see more of that. And data encryption, because ideally what we would like is data encryption from end to end. Last but not least is the top, the cloud layer, where the applications reside. So this communicates, of course, with the gateway through the internet. And can also use a wired or a cellular connection to do this. And the reason the cloud is so ideal is because for all that data coming in, you're going to need a huge expanse of space for storage and an enormous amount of power for processing. So big data, a lot of storage, analytics. These wireless sensors and actuators provide the connection between the physical realm and the digital. And they work together so that they can produce and collect vast amounts of data. And I'm going to use as an example your cell phone. So you would have your camera and your mic gathering in the information. They're the input. They are the sensors. To make this into actual information you can use, we've got the speaker and your screen. That's it. So how many are there? Billions. And there will be billions more of these IoT sensors. You may not know this, but your average home creates enough data to fill 300 iPhones with 32 gigabyte storage in just a year. And a lot of this is not necessary and needs to be filtered out.
It's my favorite speaker.
Oh, this is going to get even better, folks. Oh no.
Cheers.
Cheers. Salut. Santé. Mm. Oh. That's good. All right. Now, an example of how much doesn't get used on a gas rig with 30,000 sensors just for maintenance planning, only 1% of the information was being used. And on average, companies are using approximately 10% of what they're taking in. Now, an important point about the actuators is that they have the ability to make decisions so that they could physically move equipment or shut off a device. And I want you to think back to when we talked about handing over our control, taking ourselves out of the equation and letting the machines make the decisions. How do they communicate? There's 4 primary types of communications: device to device, device to cloud, device to gateway, and cloud to cloud. I could go into it. It's not terribly interesting. It's just so that you know how they're communicating as we go into talking about why attacks are different. So when we are talking about IoT architecture, here's the requirements, the wish list, I'd call it. So we need support, right? We need support for the data collection. We have to be able to analyze and control what's coming in from all of those sensors and actuators. We need efficiency in terms of the data handling so that we can minimize raw data coming in to make it more actionable and useful. Connectivity, communications, what we'd really like is flexible, robust protocols. We want support between those sensors and actuators and the cloud. We need to be able to make it scalable. And I think a lot of people are developing more appreciation and understanding for what that term actually means and the pain associated with it. Security. Let's start with end-to-end encryption, monitoring, and go from there. We want to have that availability as well as quality of service. Fault tolerant, minimum latency. Yes, we want it to be modular, flexible, and platform independent because we have a lot of things to connect and a lot of languages being spoken. Open standards and interoperable so that a lot of people can work with this and continue to develop it and improve it. Device management for updates and automation. And defined APIs because this will allow for easier integration with existing applications and other IoT solutions. And that brings us to this point, enterprise architecture, because we have to integrate all of this fast-moving, innovative IoT into a currently existing state with established constraints. So think of enterprise architecture as urban planning for the systems and networks and integration. All of the things have to live somewhere, right? And then systems engineering, that's for one component like a building. EA is for all of the buildings. And that's the challenge, trying to incorporate these exciting new buildings into the existing community. So you can think in terms of rigid and traditional because it's very hard to do this. That's the pain point. EA isn't necessarily designed for speed and agility at this level. We want innovation, we like innovation, but we also need to understand and adhere to the security and the structures in place for the existing tenants of our community. And IoT is constantly evolving. So it's a challenge in terms of bringing enterprise architecture up to speed to be able to recognize and work with that. Does anybody here actually work in terms of enterprise architecture or have to design for incorporating these kinds of systems? Do you find this to, what kind of challenges? Is this what you're experiencing? The challenge is to convince the business people to put the security features in the product. Thank you. So that's right. You can see that security doesn't make the list of needs. This is I'm sorry if it's hard to read, but this is an example of trying to flow across 3 different networks when you're building enterprise architecture to incorporate this. What I wanted this to bring across to you, the point I wanted to hit home was the complexity of connecting basic physical devices. It's kind of an irony, kind of like jumbo shrimp. We've got physical devices with firmware issues and logical layers and third-party APIs and a lot of different protocols. Okay, so takeaways for this section. 3 different layers of architecture: physical, the gateway, and then the cloud. How many physical devices we're dealing with just in terms of the sensors alone? The billions. Monitoring data across these different layers and these different networks. The challenge of trying to get everything to play nice. And the issues around integration and where security fits into all of this. Okay, so let's talk about how IoT attacks are different. First, take this away with you. We think in terms of attacks or breaches being primarily focused on data exfiltration. Why? Because it's monetized. There's identity theft, there's credit card fraud, there's Desjardins. Sorry, I'm going to keep throwing that out. We've worked a lot on that too. But in the IoT world, there's some of this, but those connected devices actually have a lot riding on them. They tend to be found where they run mission critical or life-saving systems. Hospitals, but also critical infrastructure. I work in threat intelligence. And when you're talking about critical infrastructure, we move up to the level of the games that nation states like to play. So in some cases, we will find attackers who want to turn those devices against the company. And it'll become about disruption or destruction. And the impact that's measured is in terms of dollars. And that will present a challenge beyond our normal CIA triangle of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the attackers can carry out attacks that are man in the middle, or spoofing, or cloning, or software attacks that can steal the credentials of the users, or encryption attacks so that they'll target key algorithms. I took this from the Erdetto Global Report from May of this year. It was a survey of 700 enterprises in 5 different countries, including China, Germany, Japan, the UK, and US. These are some major manufacturing nations. They have a lot of impact on the global economy. They stated a distinct lack of optimism about the future security of IoT devices within these organizations. And 82% of the organizations manufacturing IoT devices were concerned that what they were developing were not adequately secured from cyber attack. In the UK, Germany, and China, 100% of IoT device users felt that the cybersecurity of their devices could be improved a lot. That's a rather alarming finding considering how much consumer devices are growing. Now, 49% are making security of their product design lifecycle process a thing. And approximately half of these organizations are conducting continuous security or code reviews. That's good. But it's not good enough if all it takes is one device. Does anybody here know about MageCart? Has anybody here heard about MageCart? MageCart are a group of threat actors who very, very cleverly manipulate the JavaScript code in online payment systems. They find that exact point of entry where the consumer enters their credit card information to make their online purchase. They swap out that information with their specialized built-in payment skimmer and boom, siphon that off. They did a really good job of it. And they hit some major organizations, British Airways, for example, who just got taken to the bank on a huge fine for that. But they've hit Newegg, and they've hit Nike, and they've hit a hell of a lot of other industries through that manipulation. So if you're not checking your code, and in the cases of these people, this was third-party code that they had purchased and relied on and expected would be fine. And it was fine until it wasn't. Very powerful example. This survey found that over 1 in 4 of the organizations didn't have software protection technologies built into their business. And even less had mobile application protection. I don't know about you, but I live on my phone. I do a lot of stuff on there. I think I'm doing it safely. But am I? All right. This was from a Forrester survey. They asked some pretty interesting questions. I'm hoping you can see it from here, but my slides will be available, so you'll be able to read it further. This is just taking a pulse check on how vulnerable people feel the enterprise devices are. So what are your policies around firmware updates? Do you have automation to enable you to do this? How about default configurations? A painful illustration is the number of breaches caused by all of those databases, whether they're Amazon or Mongo or Couch, that are found by security researchers looking for them on Shodan with default configurations open to whomever finds them. So another point is, what's turned on by default when you get these devices? Are you checking for that? You'd be surprised because you could turn that off and decrease your risk. Universal plug and play and certain ports. Maybe misconfiguration is the root of all evil. Okay, so in April, Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center discovered a targeted attack by a group known as APT-28 or Strontium, Russia. They went after a VoIP phone, a printer, and a video decoder. These were the group of attacks the group of devices they were attacking. It hit multiple locations, and it used these devices as access points so that they could get into the wider corporate networks. 2 of the 3 devices carried factory default settings, and the software on the third had not yet been updated. Lesson. Points of ingress will lead to further access. So, like I said, I work in strategic threat intel, which is fascinating. It's always interesting stories. The nightly news tells you everything that I could tell you right now. But we follow the games that nation states like to play. And yes, they target critical infrastructure. They know where to hit, where it's going to hurt. Who here has heard of Stuxnet? Maybe I should say, who has not heard of Stuxnet? I used to tell this to my kids as a bedtime story. I know. But there's other targeted and destructive malware out there. For example, who has heard of Shamoon? Yeah, Saudi Aramco got hit hard. And Triton, who's heard of this one? Yeah, this is going after the security features within our critical infrastructure, the stuff we rely on for life. So international economic sanctions, as we know, provoke retaliation. Iran has a history of going after FI for this, but other things as well. So does North Korea. Thanks to the release of Mirai's source code, who here is familiar with Mirai? If not, you should definitely be. Botnets, oh my God, yes, DDoS. Remember that time we couldn't connect to anything? Facebook went down, Twitter went down, oh my God, there was no Netflix. It was terrible. Yes. We have a plethora of weaponized botnets. Please don't get me started because I love talking about that too. They're out there and they can do a hell of a lot more than DDoS. And this is all about power and control. So what are the consequences of our inaction? There's more from the Forrester survey. So yes, here are some takeaways from this section. We need to increase the awareness and understanding of the risks because unmanaged Internet of Things is far more vulnerable to attack than our conventional managed devices. We cannot apply the same attack scenarios or threat models to this group of devices. And we need to evaluate what we've got in place because the attackers can leverage it and then they can pivot and go deeper. Each endpoint will become a point of ingress for further access. What we're using ain't cutting it. All right, only takes one. So who here has had to deal with or is familiar with the problem of crypto miners? Yes, it is a growing issue. It's across all of the platforms. And you know what? They love enterprise environments. Why? Because it's so much power and they go relatively undetected. They show up as potentially unwanted programs if you're doing a cursory scan. So you don't really address it until you notice a significant dip in your CPU levels. How are they spreading? Believe it or not, Eternal Blue really is still a thing. It is leveraged and it is leveraged to the hilt. There are a lot of vulnerable systems and devices still out there. Some of the targets include Docker containers, and we talk about container escapes. Because what is the point of a container if what gets in there can escape out of there? All right. We've talked about ransomware. Who here had not heard about the attack on Norsk Hydro? Is everybody familiar with the attack on Norsk? I think it's up to $60 million now in terms of remediation. These guys got hit and hit hard, but it exemplifies the series of attacks on industry in terms of targeted ransomware. And there have been new varieties that came out this year, like Locker Goga, right? Or Ryuk, or Megacortex. For example, Walters Kluwer. They didn't exactly admit that it was ransomware, but there was a lot of chatter on the boards unofficially that this was Megacortex, and it took them right out, right at the point of tax season. A lot of people actually had to file taxes. These are accountant firms, had to file taxes after the deadline with special dispensation because they couldn't use the software because of the ransomware attack. Case in point, this can happen with unsecured and unmanaged IoT devices on your enterprise networks. So Silex malware came out in June of 2019, and it was a brief but powerful interlude. It bricked 2,000 IoT devices within the space of just hours. It wiped the firmware, similar to what BrickerBot did back in 2017. Does anybody here know about BrickerBot? Excellent. So yeah, let's talk about what happens if something completely goes after and destroys what you've got. Wipes out storage, drops firewall rules, removes network configuration, halts the device, and just stops short of literally frying the circuits. You could reinstall the firmware, but unfortunately, most people can't and won't. And many don't even realize they've been hit by this malware. They just toss it. Crack. This went after millions of first-generation Amazon Echo devices and eighth-generation Amazon Kindle. Who's got an Amazon Echo or a Kindle? Exactly. These are the actual vulnerabilities from 2017 that were leveraged. And it could be used by attackers to conduct man-in-the-middle attacks on protected WPA2 networks so that it could steal the information from those targeted devices. And then it could do a denial of service attack, a replay attack, decrypt the data, forge data packets. Everybody uses these frigging things, polycoms, right? And with travel budgets being cut, people need to use teleconferencing. Well, there have been exploits against major vulnerabilities in these systems, and that led to attacks. Polycom HDX systems. If you've got it, you may want to check into this a little bit further because these are networked by a myriad of endpoints globally. And remember what I said about one? One of these gets hit, the whole group of them get infected fast. And if I need a more poignant illustration, NotPetya. That spread like wildfire globally. Same kind of spread at the same kind of speed here. Who has heard of Urgent 11? Because this is actually really important. This affects a ton of devices by major manufacturers. You may not realize you may be hit. It's huge because 6 of these vulnerabilities can lead to remote code execution. It affects a range of versions spanning 13 years. And it's about the system it's an underlying operating system known as VxWorks. It's pervasive. It's on so many things, and attackers can circumvent the NAT and the firewalls to control these devices remotely via the TCP IP stack. It can go undetected because, according to the network, nothing's wrong here. This is normal. And there's no user interaction required once you have it in place. You don't even have to manipulate the devices. Here's what you need to know. Here's some of the companies. Here's the kinds of devices. It's in your network. There are proof of concepts of attacks online that you can look at. This is for a sonic wall firewalls. We expect our firewalls to defend and protect us, not to get pwned. Or for network devices like a printer, so that it can literally bypass and come right in. So now we understand how the attacks can be leveraged, the growing risk of crypto miners and botnets, how targeted attacks with specialized malware can work, the polycoms are not so safe, and about Urgent 11. Go home and check. All right. You need to make it better. Or else. If anybody's seen the movie iRobot, it was good until it wasn't so good, right? And that sums it up when we've got IoT infiltrating enterprise. And it's not obedient the way we expect it to be. Not like our laptops, not like our cell phones. These interact differently and they behave differently and they operate with little to no human intervention. So I'm just going to say this too. Automating convenience with inadequate supervision is going to end badly. This whole section is a takeaway. I'll start here. Know your attack surface. Strong authentication. Network segmentation. Absolutely. You got to keep them separated. Utilize and set up your firewalls and your VPNs for this. Use automation so that you don't have to rely or make mistakes. You can use automation to update firmware, to look for and monitor the devices. Behavioral monitoring so that you can check for anomalies. Oh my God, inventory everything. Please, we wish, we dream of this. Work together. We need actual IoT policy and compliance in place. You need to put the right people in place to do this, and you need to make a commitment to it as an organization. There are frameworks from NIST and CIS to start with. This is an example of what you could build off of. The questions to ask to get the information you need and hopefully get the buy-in you want. Let's not play hide and seek with the devices anymore. Let's automate how we identify what's going on the network. There's even zero trust privilege. So bottom line, we got to spend the time and the money to defend against the IoT that's sneaking in on our networks. We need to give them their own space, their own place for our own safety. Let's invest in the people, the policies, and the procedures to really commit to this and do it right. Let's invest in automation. We need to work together and collaborate, take down the silos and talk about what we're seeing, what we're doing to make it better. And then let's build better security policies. And that's it. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.